All right, well, on last week's show, I spoke about the disastrous effects of Hurricane Harvey, and that was one of the most powerful and destructive storms we ever had make landfall here in the United States. Unfortunately, of course, now we have Hurricane Irma to deal with, and that could be even worse in Florida. Although, you know, I thought about this and talked about this a lot. Last show, I talked about the impermeable cover
right.
In Houston.
In Houston, yeah.
Florida does not have that.
Right.
So Florida will almost certainly not have the kind of flooding that we saw. I mean, it won't.
Right. Well, the water will disperse quicker. Is the
much
deal.
Much quicker. But I mean, the winds from Irma are just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So it's going to be terrible. But you know, all too often, natural disasters like hurricanes, like we're talking about, like the earthquake we just were talking about earlier last night in Mexico, many times they expose poor planning and a failure to appreciate and mitigate risk, right? I mean, they tend to surface that strange human tendency to give full attention to a crisis in the moment, but avoid the corresponding and actually the more important step, if you think about it, of taking action to prevent or lessen the effects of those disasters before they happen. Right. You know, if you think about it, we're really good at firefighting, but not so much at fire prevention. You know, we firefight in the moment, but we don't do the work to prevent the fires in the first place. At least that's what author, trainer, and longtime Quality Digest contributor Arun Hariharan says in his article, which you can see right there. If it ain't broke, fix it.
I love that headline.
A great headline which appeared in yesterday's issue of the Quality Digest newsletter. In his article, Hariharan espouses his view on the value of what he calls continuous permanent improvement. To achieve lasting change for the better and to ensure that problems are fixed, I mean really fixed, and really fixed for good, Hariharan recommends employing teams of people whose jobs involve not firefighting, but fire prevention. It's important that they don't do both. After all, it's difficult, if not impossible, to prevent fires if you're spending all your time fighting them. He makes that point really clearly. You don't want them to be doing both because nowadays in many companies, they do both. And we're going to get into why that's not such a good thing here in a moment. I mean, consider the way that disaster relief and recovery is handled by most organizations and municipalities, etc. Generally, the people attempting to solve the immediate ongoing issues are usually also the ones trying to figure out, both in the moment and in the longer term, fixes to prevent these things from going wrong again. And one of the problems here is that when one crisis is over, the last thing most people want to think about is the next crisis, right? Yeah. Yet that's exactly the time when you're best equipped to make decisions that can really mitigate the effects of the disasters that are yet to happen. And trust me, or better yet, trust Hariharan, they will happen. Having one group deal with the immediate after effects of disaster and another working on prevention makes much better sense because they involve very different approaches, right? I mean, when you're in that moment where something's happened, and again, we'll get to this, and it isn't necessarily disaster recovery. It could just be a booth that you had in your shop floor or whatever. Yeah. When you're in that moment where something bad happens, right? I mean, you need to engage a team, several teams sometimes, just to get it solved. Right. You know, all right, don't worry about why it happened, just fix it. It's triage, right? But at the same time, you want to be doing that other work that involves figuring out what's going to be, you know, what happened and why. So you need another team to do that. If the triage team is also responsible for then kind of splitting their mind off to saying, okay, we're analyzing this, we're fixing it right now, we're also trying to take data on why it happened and what we're going to do to fix it, they're not focused on either one, and it's just inefficient, is what Hariharan is saying here. And by the way, as I say, this doesn't apply just to disasters. Everyday normal organizations do this too. And it's, like I say, it's kind of a two-step dance. I mean, first you do the triage and you ensure the best possible outcomes. And that's, like we say, that's firefighting. And then you put into place plans to prevent such problems from happening again. That's the fire prevention part. And like I said, they're usually done by one and the same team, but splitting those two into discrete areas of operation can really have a significant effect on the success of both functions. Of course, now this is important. Both teams should talk to one another. I mean, you need to have a good communication because each has its own set of roles and responsibilities that they should stick to, but they also have data and information that they can share with one another that makes them both work much more efficiently. I mean, in my opinion, I think there's a really big psychological component to all this, which I think is pretty easy to see, but maybe it's harder to integrate into management thinking. As I mentioned just a few moments ago, after people have gone through the stress and the strain of firefighting and cleaned up, whatever mess needed to be cleaned up, there's a natural human tendency to deeply exhale, right, and say, I'm glad that's over with, right? I never want to deal with or think about X, Y, or Z ever again. Right. And of course, not thinking about those things, that's the worst possible way to prevent reoccurrence. Somebody has to think about it and ask loads of questions if the root causes of the issue are going to be understood and hopefully mitigated. To do so, leaders of the organization quite naturally turn to those who just completed their firefighting. That's what I'm getting to. I'm kind of going in a circle here, but you get the point. I mean, they'll say, okay, well, you fixed this problem. What did you see, right? They assume that their experiences with firefighting are invaluable to the root cause analysis, and they are invaluable if they're put into their proper context. But you need to dispassionately look at what happened, and that's kind of a hard ask for people just coming back from the front lines. I mean, somebody just coming back from the front lines of solving a problem, oftentimes, as I say, don't want to even think about it anymore. To do a debrief and to get from them what happened is oftentimes a difficult thing. So turning to support teams who don't fight the fires but understand how to interpret the experiences of those that do is really the proper way not only to fight fires more efficiently but to reduce the total number of fires in the first place. And that's really a great lesson for anybody involved in quality or risk management or any other efforts that lead to better outcomes for customers or employees or citizens too. So this idea that you separate those two things I think is really important. And it isn't common. I don't think it's common. Yeah. But Hariharan says that you need teams that are devoted just to continuous permanent improvement. They're floating teams, they go from issue to issue. They're not working on exactly what happened and why in the moment. The people that are doing that work, the triage and the cleanup work are doing that. Right. But they're looking at a higher level about, okay, why did this happen? They're interviewing the people that fix the problems in the moment. They're interviewing other stakeholders, and they're trying to get to root causes that can be solved and fixed so that you don't have fires going on in the future.